Good morning. Morning. For the, I had a 1 week topic planned, and I might get to it, but for the last few weeks, Larry has been teaching from a book called The Purity Principle that concerns purity mostly with respect to our Christian attitudes and behaviors about sex. And what he said kept inspiring certain thoughts in me that, as a fellow elder, I want to address, which is there are many ways in which Christians are called to be countercultural. That is, the culture that surrounds us has some attitudes about certain things that are not compatible with Christianity, and we're called upon to be different. And hopefully, even more than that, we're called upon to influence that culture, to help improve that culture. And I wanted today just to challenge a couple of the worldly ideas on this topic. And the first one I have labeled as the objectification of women. In our society, especially with massive amounts of media, TV shows, movies, music, advertising of various sorts, what's one of the ways they get your attention with it? Try to make you look at an ad. Try to use women, perhaps scantily clad women or something, so that you'll look at this ad over here. And so women are being used as objects, not as total people with personalities. They're being used as objects for commercial reasons, amongst others. And one of the things that I tend to do, just to kind of reject a lot of the world's thinking, especially if I'm watching TV or looking at an ad or something, is, I talk back to the TV. And one of the things that I say to myself whenever someone is doing this, is objectifying a woman, I like to have little slogans, just something easy to remember. And for me, I say, she's a person, not an object. And this is something that should be obvious, it shouldn't be controversial or whatever. But especially, I think, if we remind ourselves of what God said when he created man and woman. In Genesis 1:27, he created them, man and woman, but it says, he created man in his own image. Every human being is an image bearer of God. Every human being was created to be different than an animal. Every human being was created to be something higher than that. And our treatment of other human beings, therefore, should always be informed by that. And if we're informed by reminding ourselves, this person is an image bearer of God. This person is not an object. Person is not someone for me to use for my own ends. Because this person is an image bearer of God, then that will change our behavior towards other people, because it'll change the underlying attitude that we have. And if we exhibit that behavior, if we treat other people as image bearers of God, it will be an example to the world outside the church. It will be a higher calling. It will be something hopefully people will notice in our behavior and recognize as being better than the common behavior of the world. I want to move to a related topic, but closely related topic. But before I do, if anybody has any comments on this subject. And that's kind of part of you could say this is part of a general topic of what's called reductionism, which is you take something complicated and you reduce it to some little subset of it. So a human being is a complex of all kinds of factors, but you can reduce a human being. You can turn a human being into a consumer. All you are is a consumer of goods. All that matters in life is economics, and so on. Money. Money is all that matters. That's a form of reductionism of a human being into something much less. And what you're talking about is human beings are mere tools to be used for a joke or an advertisement or something. They're not really human beings anymore. They're just what is needed for make an impression, sell something, attract attention. Maybe you can attract attention to an advertisement more by having people be idiots, Right. As opposed to doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where in order for me to be lifted up, I got to knock you down by comparison. And well, and that's an important point, that a lot of times people have gotten a legalistic view of what Christ said in the Sermon on the Mount about looking at a woman to lust after her, and they've interpreted it as, if I notice this woman over here is pretty, then that's a sin. That's not what it says. People can't help but notice that other people are attractive. That's not lusting after them. That's not indulging in some sort of lustful thought. It's not reducing them and objectifying them. So I don't have to feel guilty every time I think a woman's pretty, but I don't have to go further and lust after her and turn her into an object in my mind and so on. So you have to keep from reducing someone to just an object. That's a human being that you're talking about. There's a related topic to this that occurs to me, which is, I would call it the sexualization of children. Because these advertisements and TV shows and music videos and whatever that I'm talking about that objectify women don't limit themselves to adult women. And in recent years, we've seen a lot of underage girls being used in this way. And that's a really troubling trend to me. Child actresses have spoken out years later sometimes about the traumatic experience they had making some movie where they were underage and they were being asked to do nude or partially nude scenes. And in fact, I just read the other day, this goes way, way back. In 1968, there was a version of Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare that was done by the Italian director Franco Zeffirelli, and Olivia Hussey spoke out just recently. It was controversial at the time. They had some fairly nude scenes. And Romeo and Juliet were teenagers in Shakespeare's play. And Olivia Hussey, the actress, was 15 when this movie was filmed. And at the time, there was a certain controversy, there was a certain pushback about what was done in the movie. And probably, and this is something I want to address also, we get afraid, oh, if I speak out about something, if I object to something, everybody will say, well, you're an old prude or something, you know. That'll be uncool to say something. And that's what went on in 1968. Some people were saying this is not right. And others were, oh, you're an old prude. But then the actress herself, years later, speaks up that this was a traumatic experience in her life. What she was asked to do in the movie. You know. So who was right? Was it the people who spoke up and said this is a wrong thing to do in this movie? Or was it the people who said, oh, you're just being a prude? The actress herself says it was a traumatizing experience. You know, and this is not a very terribly recent phenomenon in that sense. That's a 1968 release of a movie. But it seems like this, you know, this is the word exploitation is used. Exploitation means to use someone else as a tool for your ends. So if you're a movie maker, TV show maker, music video maker, advertising producer, you have your ends and you're going to use somebody to accomplish your ends, even if it hurts them. That's exploitation. And this exploitation, particularly of child actresses, is something that they feel. And later on, when they reflect back on it, they say, it was bad. What I went through was bad. And it, right. Yeah. You can stand against the values of the world that's swarming around you, which they did. Even if you're surrounded by things that are contrary to your values from the Bible, you don't have to give in and absorb the world's values. One of the things that's being exploited is that when girls reach a certain age, before boys, they start to shoot up in height. 11, 12-year-old girls start to shoot up in height, right? They're still girls. They're not women. That's another little slogan we need to repeat to ourselves. They deserve to be girls, to be treated as girls, to have a childhood. You know, they're not women. I don't care that they shot up in height. They're not women, and they shouldn't be exploited or sexualized the way they're being done in our culture. And a lot of, even music groups or singers who are trying to appeal specifically to the 12, 13, 14-year-old girl audience often communicate that the way a girl empowers herself is to not wear much clothing, to dance suggestively, etc., etc. They sing about sex and so on, and they're targeting 12, 13, 14-year-old girls. They're part of the sexualization of children for their own economic gain, their own benefit. And these are not adults. These are girls. And childhood is something to be protected. Everyone deserves a childhood and not to have it robbed of them, to be traumatized, and so on. But what do we do about it? And this is besides not participating in it ourselves, I find that if you're trying to communicate Christian values to someone, the most effective way is not to deliver a sermon to them on the spot or give them a lecture. But we each have the opportunity. If you're with other people and you see an advertisement, let's say, that's obviously exploitative of women, objectifying of women, and you were just to speak one sentence like, I'm really tired of women being used as objects in all these ads. That's it. No sermon, just a sentence. A sentence, not a sermon. Or, I'm really tired of seeing these underage girls be sexualized and used in these ads or videos or whatever. That's all you have to say. To communicate to someone, there is a different point of view on this. And I think what we'll find out is, it's a funny thing, there's a current that runs through a culture in a certain way, and there are people who are not comfortable with it, but they don't speak up, including those of us in the church sometimes. But even outside the church, there will be people who have been thinking they're not comfortable with what they're seeing. But who wants to be the first one to speak up? People are afraid. You'll sound like, a prude. You'll sound, like you're too fussy about this or whatever. But the funny thing is when somebody does speak up, even if it's just a sentence, quite often you find that other people's attitude is like, wow, I've been thinking that for a long time. I'm glad somebody finally spoke up about it. Quite often people are just waiting for someone else to be the first one to have the courage to say something. A lot of people are watching this stuff come before their eyes, and they're not real comfortable with it. They don't like it, but they're not saying anything. Oftentimes, all it takes is just a little bit of courage, and we should have courage. We should have confidence that we're right. It's not good to objectify people. It's not good to reduce someone to an object. And we know that it's a better world if everyone treats everyone else as an image bearer of God, right? So why should we be afraid to say a sentence about that? This is a superior way of thinking. To think of other people as image bearers of God rather than as objects is a better way of thinking. And no one is going to have a good case to make of the opposite. No, it's better to treat people as objects, I mean, this is kind of a slam dunk, so why not have the courage to say something? They're not going to use the word no in raising their children? Oh, okay. Yeah, well, but see, the thing is, I understand what you're saying about not being so worried if someone else is offended, but what I'm advocating is not go out and offend and say, who cares? Because what I'm saying is that on this particular topic, now there's other topics, but on this particular topic, I don't think that saying, you know what, I wish they wouldn't sexualize children and use them in advertisements to sell things, I don't think that's a real controversial position. You, you know, right. You were you were Mr. and Mrs. Noah. As athlete, everything around you was. On on the main things that I've talked about today, I think they're not too controversial, but there will be some people who would push back against even the sentence or two that I'm talking about saying. And I think it's important to remember you don't persuade everybody in the world to change their mind instantly. There could be some people, who would try to even defend sexualization of children or something, but most people won't. And so the fact that I don't have a 100% success rate of getting people to agree with me doesn't really matter, because that's the way life is. I mean, you don't ever have a 100% success rate or anything. But I think on the things that I've been talking about, if I just say, look at that, TV show, or look at that ad, I'm really getting tired of the way they're using underage girls or something, and most people, I think, at that point would be very self-conscious about speaking up on the other side and trying to defend it. So. Cindy. Andy? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Su- Support more of what you want and less of what you don't want. Right. Just one closing thought from the book of Acts. Sometimes in the book of Acts, there's this phrase, and it's different in different translations. In some translations, it's the God-fearers. And in some translations, it's those who fear God. You can see it, Acts, I think, 10, verse 2. Cornelius, Peter's about to go convert the first Gentile. It says he was a Gentile, he was a Roman, but he was a man who feared God, or he was a God-fearer. Acts chapter 13, Paul is speaking, there's reference to God-fearers. And what this refers to is that in the ancient Jewish synagogues, there were Gentiles who came in and sat in the synagogue and listened and studied and worshiped with Jews without becoming Jews, without becoming proselytes. But they were attracted. Now, you might think that in this pagan world where the Jews have these very strict moral standards and this pagan world out here does not, that you wouldn't be able to compete with this pagan world, that the pagan world would be more appealing to people. But actually, there's a certain percentage of the people who said, the high moral standards of the Jews make me curious, make me want to come be more like them and learn from them. There were people who were pagans living in this pagan environment who said it would be better to have higher standards. And a lot of times today we think, well, everybody out in our culture is doing whatever they want, having fun and seeking pleasure and whatever. And all you can do is come across as a scold, as a prude, whatever. And how could that possibly be appealing? How could you compete with what the other side is offering? Well, the answer is, with a gentle spirit, if you just say something like the sentences that I given as an examples. If you just say something, I wish they wouldn't do this with girls or with women or whatever. There's a lot of people who will immediately recognize something noble. There's a higher standard being advocated here. And not everybody reacts negatively to a higher standard. Some people find it attractive. Some people rebel against it. You don't reach everybody. But you'd be surprised. There are people out there who are sick of low standards. And they're waiting for someone to have the courage to advocate a higher standard. Janet. Right. I said, it doesn't have to be a,
respond to criticism and judgment. Oh, you're just another
right.
self-righteous person. I think we underestimate the power of God to work in our lives day by day if we're using language that is becoming a child of God. We're expressing thoughts that are becoming of Jesus' nature. We're walking in that pathway. It has come back to me time and again through life experiences. When you think people aren't paying attention, you're wrong. They are. It's that day-to-day living where you may not be able to convince the world that you have made a difference. Your neighbors or the parents of your friends, or maybe, or I mean, like your children's friends. Their friends may come to your house to play with your kids, and they will notice that there's something different in your house
Yeah.
than in their own home.
Yeah.
People will notice that. Maybe it will have an effect, maybe it won't. But again, I think Jesus came to change the world, and people still didn't necessarily accept him. We can't expect everybody to like what we say and how we live our lives. All we can do is, again, don't be afraid to speak. Hopefully the Spirit will give us the words to use when the
Right.
opportunity presents itself to say things in a loving way that express what we believe God wants us to do with our lives. But it's that just day-to-day living, that peaceful walk with Jesus that I think is going to speak the loudest. People will notice that there's something a little bit different
Very true.
about people that put on Christ.
And maybe at a future class, I'll inspire everybody to be courageous in the face of martyrdom or some terrible pushback. But I just want to remind you, today I'm saying there's even things where people are probably just waiting for someone else to say. It's kind of the opposite of expecting a lot of vicious opposition. It's more like everybody sees this. A lot of people aren't comfortable with it. Who's ever going to say anything? And it just has to be a sentence or two. So, anyway, thank you very much for your thoughts. Jay will be beginning a new class series starting next week.